In here you're really gonna like to see.
Okay.
1963, American-made Fender Stratocaster.
Oh, to me, this is the guitar.
But there's something very, very special about this specific guitar.
In an episode that would become one of the most talked about moments in Pawn Stars history, Rick Harrison came face to face with a guitar so rare and so valuable that even his famous negotiating skills couldn't close the deal. The 1963 Fender Stratocaster that walked into the gold and silver pawn shop was a piece of rock and roll history, once played by Jimi Hendrix himself, with a jaw-dropping $1 million price tag. What happened during those tense negotiations? Why did Rick walk away empty-handed? Join us as we unveil the events surrounding the $1 million guitar that shocked Rick, the guitar that stopped Rick Harrison in his tracks. February 27, 2014, marked an extraordinary day at the world-famous gold and silver pawn shop in Las Vegas. A customer walked through those familiar doors carrying something that would make Rick Harrison's eyes light up like never before. A 1963 Olympic white Fender Stratocaster with an incredible story attached to it. The episode, fittingly titled Purple Haze, after one of Hendrix's most iconic songs, would become one of the most memorable segments in the show's history. The seller, a man named David, wasn't just making wild claims about owning a piece of musical history. He came prepared with documentation that seemed almost too good to be true. According to David's account, this wasn't just any Stratocaster that happened to look like one Hendrix might have played. This was allegedly Hendrix's favorite studio recording guitar, the very instrument the legendary guitarist used to lay down tracks for several albums at Juggy Sound Studio in New York City during the height of his career in the 1960s. Rick Harrison, who had seen countless items walk through his shop over the years, couldn't hide his excitement. Jimi Hendrix was an icon, Rick said as he carefully examined the white Stratocaster. This guy did things with the guitar that no one did before. For someone who prides himself on maintaining a poker face during negotiations, Rick's enthusiasm was palpable. This was more than just another potential purchase. This was a chance to own a piece of the legacy left by one of the most influential musicians of the 20th century. But even in his excitement, Rick knew better than to take anything at face value. In the pawn business, authentication is everything, and a guitar of this magnitude would require expert verification. The stakes were simply too high to rely on paperwork alone. What Rick didn't know yet was that this guitar would test not only his expertise, but also his willingness to gamble big on rock and roll history. What was the series of events that unfolded after? The left-handed legend's right-handed guitar. Before diving into the authentication process, Rick took a moment to share some fascinating context about Jimi Hendrix's unique relationship with guitars. Hendrix was famously left-handed, but in his early days as a struggling musician, he couldn't afford the luxury of purchasing left-handed guitars. His solution was as creative as his playing style. He simply took right-handed guitars and restrung them upside down. Even when he had money, he continued playing guitars that were right-handed guitars strung upside down, Rick explained to viewers. This quirk of musical history would prove crucial in authenticating the guitar David had brought in. Any genuine Hendrix guitar would bear the telltale signs of being played in this unconventional manner, marks that would be nearly impossible to fake convincingly. David had done his homework. He presented Rick with a magazine article from Vintage Guitar magazine that featured this exact instrument. The March 2013 issue, written by editor Ward Meeker, contained a detailed story about this particular 1963 Stratocaster, serial number L14985. According to the article, Hendrix preferred using this guitar at Juggy Sound Studio because it was smaller, more laid back, and less high-tech than other recording facilities he used. The documentation also included something even more compelling, a letter bearing a signature purported to to be from Leon Hendrix, Jimi's brother. The letter authenticated the guitar and confirmed its connection to the legendary musician. However, Rick's years in the business had taught him that letters and magazine articles, while helpful, weren't enough. He needed eyes-on verification from someone who knew vintage guitars inside and out. But would the expert confirm what David claimed, or would this turn out to be an elaborate forgery? The tension was building, and so was Rick's anticipation. Jesse Amoroso's authentication. When high-value guitars walk into the gold and silver pawn shop, there's only one person Rick trusts to verify their authenticity: Jesse Amoroso of Cowtown Guitars. Amoroso, who has appeared numerous times on Pawn Stars as the show's go-to vintage guitar expert, brought over 20 years of experience and a reputation for having one of the largest collections of vintage guitars in North America. His shop in downtown Las Vegas had authenticated instruments for celebrities, including Carlos Santana and members of Imagine Dragons. As soon as Amoroso walked into the pawn shop and laid eyes on the white Stratocaster, his reaction was immediate and unmistakable. "This is stupid cool," he exclaimed, his voice carrying the weight of genuine excitement. For someone who had handled countless vintage guitars throughout his career, that level of enthusiasm spoke volumes. Amoroso's authentication process was methodical and thorough. He began by examining the guitar's most distinctive features, modifications that were consistent with Hendrix's known playing style. The most crucial evidence was the ring wear on the top side of the fretboard, marks that would only appear if someone wearing a ring played the guitar upside down. For a right-handed guitar played by a left-handed musician, these scuff marks in this particular location were a smoking gun. But Amoroso didn't stop there. He cross-referenced the guitar's serial number with historical photographs of Hendrix and the guitar. Everything matched. The Olympic white finish, the small headstock characteristic of 1963 Fenders, the maple neck carved to Fender's B contour, and the Brazilian rosewood fretboard. Every detail aligned with what was known about this instrument. Perhaps most fascinating was the pickguard. What had started as white plastic had naturally aged into a distinctive mint green through a polymer UV reaction. This patina, highly prized by collectors, would have occurred naturally shortly after the guitar left the Fender factory. It was a detail that would be extraordinarily difficult to fake convincingly. Before delivering his verdict, Amoroso did something that sent chills through everyone in the shop. He plugged the guitar in and played it. The riffs and chords that rang out from the amplifier weren't just a sound test. They were a connection to history, the same circuits and pickups that Hendrix himself had used to create some of the most innovative sounds in rock music. After his thorough examination, Amoroso's assessment was clear and shocking. "This is without a doubt legitimate," he confirmed. Then came the number that would define the entire negotiation. This guitar could fetch anywhere between $750,000 and $1 million at the right auction. The room went silent. Rick Harrison, who had spent decades in the pawn business and had seen items ranging from presidential artifacts to rare automobiles, was about to enter one of the most high-stakes negotiations of his career. But would his legendary bargaining skills be enough to close this deal? The negotiation that tested Rick's limits. Rick Harrison opened with an offer that shocked David: $450,000. For most items, this would be an astronomical sum. For a guitar potentially worth $1 million at auction, it was an insult, and David knew it. "I take all the risk," Rick explained, launching into his standard pawnshop logic. "You walk away with the cash." It was a familiar argument to anyone who had watched Pawn Stars. The shop had to account for the costs of authentication, marketing, finding the right buyer, auction fees, and the simple reality that they needed to make a profit. Every dollar Rick spent had to leave room for a return on investment. But David wasn't budging. "For a guitar that could fetch maybe $1 million on any day, I am not willing to leave that much on the table," he responded firmly. His counteroffer stood at $750,000, exactly what Amoroso had suggested as the minimum auction price. David was essentially asking Rick to pay full market value with no margin for profit, a proposition that went against everything the pawn business represented. Rick came back with $550,000, emphasizing the work he would need to do. It was true. Selling an item of this caliber wasn't as simple as putting it in the shop window. It would require finding the right collector, possibly through a major auction house like Julian's or Christie's, which would take substantial commission fees that could easily reach 20 to 25% of the final sale price. The negotiations reached a stalemate. David held firm at $750,000, refusing to negotiate down. Rick, unwilling to commit that much capital to a single item with uncertain profit margins, couldn't meet him there. As David prepared to leave with the guitar, Rick made one final attempt, a last-ditch effort to salvage the deal: $600,000. David didn't even hesitate. With the guitar safely back in its case, he shook his head and walked toward the door. Rick Harrison, the man famous for closing deals on everything from JFK's cigar box to Maurice Sendak's original Wild Things illustrations, watched as $1 million piece of rock history walked out of his shop. The deal that got away would haunt him, and the aftermath would reveal surprising twists. How did it come back to haunt him? What happened next raised eyebrows among Pawn Stars fans and guitar enthusiasts alike. Cowtown Guitars and the Conflict of Interest. Shortly after the episode aired, the same 1963 Hendrix Stratocaster appeared for sale at Cowtown Guitars, Jesse Amoroso's shop, with a price tag hovering around the $1 million mark. The revelation sparked intense discussion on guitar forums and fan communities. According to Wikipedia, Cowtown Guitars had actually become the official broker of the Hendrix Stratocaster in 2012, 2 years before the Pawn Stars episode aired. Jesse Amoroso was one of 3 vintage guitar experts who appraised the guitar, authenticating it through specific modifications made by Hendrix personally: its unusual green pickguard and a telltale black mark inside the electronics compartment. These details were confirmed not only by Amoroso, but also by Leon Hendrix, who remembered seeing the guitar in the apartment he shared with Jimi in the 1960s. In June 2013, Amoroso even visited legendary pickup maker Seymour Duncan, who had originally custom-wound the pickups for Hendrix in the 1960s. Duncan authenticated both the pickups and the pickguard, adding another layer of verification to the guitar's provenance. The timeline raised questions. If Cowtown Guitars was already the broker for the instrument, was the Pawn Stars appearance staged for dramatic television? Guitar forum users pointed out that the episode appeared to be set up in advance, with David likely never intending to actually sell the guitar to Rick. The purpose may have been purely promotional, to give the guitar national television exposure and drive up interest among potential buyers who could afford the 7-figure asking price. One forum commenter noted something particularly telling. "Did you notice that none of the other customers is even looking at this guy with a Hendrix guitar who is negotiating a $1 million deal? They look when the guy plays horribly and applaud. Then they all go back to their own business. They don't even watch him walk out with a $1 million guitar/item in a case." The staged nature of reality television is no secret, but this particular episode seemed to cross into territory that bothered some viewers. Rick called Jesse in as a supposedly neutral expert, yet Jesse's shop stood to benefit directly from the guitar's increased profile. According to Looper, at the time of their reporting, the Stratocaster was back on the market with Cowtown Guitars as its broker, confirming the suspicions of many fans. Still, whether staged or genuine, the authentication itself appeared legitimate. The guitar's journey is well documented in multiple publications, including Guitar Aficionado magazine's March/April 2011 issue, which featured an article titled "Legendary Connection: The Unique Story of a '63 Fender Strat" by Richard Beanstalk. While the guitar is legendary, fans didn't understand why it was worth $1 million. What made it so valuable? The guitar's extraordinary journey. To understand why this particular Stratocaster commanded such an astronomical price, it's essential to understand its history beyond just Hendrix's ownership. According to auction documentation, the guitar has a fascinating provenance that has been verified by multiple experts. The guitar weighs 7.6 pounds, features an Olympic white finish, and still has its original pickguard that has naturally aged to the prized mint green color. One of Hendrix's earliest owned Stratocasters, he typically played this guitar at Juggy Sound in New York City, one of his preferred recording studios. The studio was smaller and more intimate than the high-tech facilities that many musicians preferred, and Hendrix felt comfortable there. After Hendrix's tragic death in 1970, the guitar was given to Eddie Kramer, the chief engineer at Juggy Sound, who had worked closely with Hendrix on numerous recording sessions. Kramer kept the instrument until his death in the 1980s, at which point it was bequeathed to a family member. The guitar then passed through various hands before eventually ending up in a collection that included approximately 200 guitars, TV and movie props, and historical documents. Jesse Amoroso discovered the guitar when a collector asked if he could help sell some guitars, vaguely describing them as collectibles. What Amoroso found exceeded his wildest expectations. "Anything Hendrix is rare," Amoroso explained in an interview with Las Vegas City Life. But his earlier Strats? No one knows where the hell they went. He smashed stuff. The fact that this guitar survived intact and in relatively good condition made it an extraordinary find. To put the Stratocaster's value in perspective, it's worth examining what other Hendrix guitars have sold for at auction. The most famous Hendrix guitar is the white Fender Stratocaster he played at Woodstock, which was purchased by Microsoft co-founder Paul Allen for $2 million. That guitar now resides at Seattle's Museum of Pop Culture, where Allen hoped it would inspire future generations of musicians just as seeing Hendrix had inspired him. Paul Allen's purchase set a benchmark for what Hendrix guitars could fetch at auction. Given that the Woodstock Stratocaster sold for $2 million, Jesse Amoroso's valuation of $750,000 to $1 million for the Juggy Sound Studio guitar seems entirely reasonable. While the Woodstock performance represents perhaps the single most iconic moment in electric guitar history, studio guitars have their own cachet among serious collectors. These were the instruments used to create the actual recordings that defined Hendrix's legacy. The studio Stratocaster's value also reflects broader trends in the music memorabilia market. In recent years, guitars owned by legendary musicians have consistently shattered expectations. Peter Green's 1959 Les Paul Standard, now owned by Metallica's Kirk Hammett, sold for approximately $2 million. Jerry Garcia's Wolf guitar, built by luthier Doug Irwin, fetched a similar amount. Even John Lennon's 1963 Gibson J160E acoustic guitar, which disappeared for decades before being rediscovered, sold for $2.1 million in 2015. These sales demonstrate that the market for authenticated rockstar guitars is robust and growing, with serious collectors willing to pay premium prices for instruments with impeccable provenance. Rick Harrison's concern about finding the right buyer was valid, but with proper marketing through a major auction house, the Hendrix Stratocaster would likely have attracted intense bidding. Why did Rick ultimately refuse to meet David's asking price? Rick Harrison's calculated risk. That wasn't. The answer lies in the fundamental economics of the pawn business and Rick's personal investment philosophy. Throughout Pawn Stars' history, Rick has demonstrated a pattern of being willing to go big on certain items while being extremely conservative on others. Rick's biggest purchase on the show was $250,000 for Maurice Sendak's original illustrations from Where the Wild Things Are. That deal represented a calculated risk. Children's book illustration originals from such an iconic work had a clear market, and Rick was able to negotiate significantly below the expert's valuation. With the Hendrix guitar, the mathematics didn't work in his favor the same way. At David's asking price of $750,000, Rick would need to sell the guitar for at least $900,000 to make a reasonable profit after accounting for auction fees, marketing costs, and the shop's overhead. While possible, it would require finding a buyer willing to pay near the maximum estimated value. If the guitar only fetched $750,000 at auction, the low end of the expert's estimate, Rick would essentially break even or potentially lose money after fees. Furthermore, tying up $750,000 in a single item would have represented an enormous concentration of capital for the gold and silver pawn shop. Rick's typical strategy involves maintaining liquidity and diversification, buying numerous smaller items rather than betting everything on one massive purchase. The Hendrix guitar would have violated this principle. Rick has also experienced losses when selling high-value items at auction. In a Rick's Roulette episode, he revealed taking significant losses on items he sent to Julian's Auctions in Los Angeles, including $29,000 on a 1940s Indian motorcycle with sidecar and $35,000 on a Vic Flick-owned Fender Stratocaster. Sold most of my items, getting my ass handed to me, and it doesn't feel good, Rick admitted. Those losses may have made him more cautious about gambling on high-stakes guitar deals. Should Rick have gone higher to secure this piece of Jimi Hendrix history? Or was he smart to stick to his principles and avoid over-leveraging on a single item? Share your thoughts with us in the comment section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.